Heath is one of the greatest bodybuilders of all time, and his physique at his first Olympia win in 2011 could be considered the most flawless physique. Literally, there's no weak point to that physique. It was complete top to bottom, not missing anything. He also had the fullness, the 3D effect, and the conditioning. If there's one thing you could take away from this physique, it's about his structure, namely the width of his clavicle bone, which made a couple of poses like the front lat spread and maybe the abs and thighs not as competitive. Now, don't get me wrong, these poses were still good in 2011 for Phil, but not as great as the others. In 2024, our Mr. Olympia looks completely different, and while you may think that Samson Dauda has no chance against a complete bodybuilder like Heath was in 2011, when looking at them separately, standing next to each other, things might get a little trickier for the 7-time Mr. Olympia. Samson Dauda is a massive bodybuilder. He was allegedly 305 pounds at the 2024 Mr. Olympia, whereas Phil was at max 240 in 2011. That's a pretty considerable weight difference. Considering this, and also Samson's incredible shoulder width, this should give us a pretty intense matchup today. Samson Dauda, Mr. Olympia 2024 versus Heath, Mr. Olympia 2011. Front double biceps, and honestly, that weight difference is not visible in these pics. The main reason might be because of Phil's smaller bone structure, meaning a lot of that difference is due to Samson's bigger and probably denser bone structure, because muscle-wise, Phil looks to be more filled out here. I'm gonna be honest with you guys, this pose doesn't look good for Samson already. I dare you to show me one point where he beats Phil here, because I admit, I can't see one yet. I was expecting at least the midsection to look better for Samson, especially since he's hitting a vacuum, something Phil never did. But here, Phil's crunched down abs look more aesthetic than Samson's vacuum. Or is it just me? Furthermore, we have the guns, where Phil has the better biceps, the superior muscle details, and separation through the arms overall. Phil also has the better triceps sweeps and the superior forearms. Pound for pound, their lats match up pretty well here, and their V-tapers are pretty much similar as well. Lower body, Samson has some of the best quads in the world today, but Heath was actually underrated in this department and rarely gets the credit for his wheels from the front. He was so complete everywhere that his powerful quads got lost in the mix most of the time. The idea is that Phil is not giving up anything in this pose when it comes to the quads either, and plus, he has the better calves too. If you want to nitpick every muscle group, you could argue Samson has the bigger chest, but Phil's chest, despite not being as large, was round and bubbly. You could also argue Samson has a more pronounced X-frame, mainly due to his structure, having longer limbs that are filled up pretty nicely. Conditioning-wise, they match up pretty well from the front, but Phil has better muscle definition in the upper body. Overall, this pose goes to the 7-time Mr. Olympia, in my opinion. The front lat spread is probably Phil's weakest pose at this show due to his narrow shoulders, but here in 2011 it was actually more than decent. He had a small waist which gave him a decent taper. His lats are arguably even more pronounced than Samson's here, and I always appreciate flexed abs in the front lat spread, but we can see that his arms are too dominant for his structure in this pose, and also due to his narrowness, his chest looks squeezed up, despite looking nice and bubbly. On the other side, we have Samson, who's one of the widest bodybuilders of all time, always an asset in the lat spread poses. His longer limbs also help in the front lat spread, giving him more leverage to open up, and also leaving more space for the lats to be showcased. All in all, the front lat spread is a Samson Dauda pose. Now this should be interesting, the side chest pose. Whoever thought Heath had a weaker chest thought wrong. It's true that his chest wasn't as wide because of his structure, but it was round, 3D, and also detailed. However, this is one department where Samson Dauda has Heath beat the chest. His chest is as round and bubbly, but also very large, reminiscent of the golden era guys like Arnold or Lou Ferrigno. The thing is that Phil dominates the arms, but his arms might actually be a little too dominant in this pose, to be fair. Lower body, I think Samson looks great next to Phil, who we all know had one of the best side legs of all time, especially due to his crazy hanging hamstring. Samson's hamstring is indeed inferior, but he compensates with a bigger and maybe more detailed outer quad. The biggest difference in this pose is the execution. Samson has more of a classical side chest execution, while Phil always opted for the side most muscular variation. Now, this pose could really go either way, but in my opinion, for what this pose should represent, I'm gonna have to go with Samson, and I know this will not sit well with a lot of you in the comment section. Let me know your thoughts on this pose. Back double biceps, and Phil was something else, man. There's nothing you can take away from him in this pose right here. He's got everything. He probably has the most complete and balanced back of all time, with crazy muscle bellies and defined separation between every muscle group. His guns are simply complete with some of the best biceps, triceps and forearms of all time. His shoulders connecting the guns to that incredible back are perfect as well. Lower body, he is simply spot on with perfectly proportioned, defined muscle groups. Everything is on point, glutes, hamstrings, calves, outer sweeps, everything falls in perfectly. I think Phil is often overlooked in this pose, with Ronnie and Dorian being mentioned more often, but actually Phil might be the best ever because he had something neither of them had: symmetry and balance. His incredible balance in this pose might actually work against him, since no muscle group really stands out when everything is glued in so perfectly. Back to our comparison, Samson did well in this pose in 2024. He improved his back drastically and he came with drier glutes and hams, but there's nothing he can do against Phil Heath here, with all due respect. The back lat spread should be a little more interesting because Phil's narrowness comes into play again, and this is a lat spread pose after all. However, Phil compensated for that lack of width with the craziest muscle density. I don't know if anybody has said this before, but it looks like he's pulling a most muscular from the back here. His back looks thick, defined and 3D, more 3D than anybody else ever. Now, Samson wins the width here, there's no doubt, and his back lat spread improved just as much as his back double, but I still think he's no match for Phil here. He's lacking the details through the teres minors, through the lats, through the lower traps to go against the gift here. He's only winning the overall width here against Phil, which is not enough. The side triceps is a very interesting pose because we have apples versus oranges when it comes to the physiques, but to the display as well. I can't express enough how much I like Samson's side triceps at this show, and unfortunately, after Tyler Mannion advised him to not do it like this again, I'm afraid we won't actually be seeing this again at the next show, but I digress. As good as Samson would look here with his crazy chest, thick triceps, tight waist and impressive lower body, my eyes are drawn to Phil Heath again. When it comes to the chest and midsection, Phil is matching Samson pretty well, but on top he has a more defined and striated triceps and superior shoulders, plus better muscle details and separation overall. When it comes to the lower body, as much as I like Samson's display, Phil has the better side leg. I think it actually looks even better than in the side chest here, with that crazy line separating the quads from his incredible hamstrings. Somehow I feel like this pose has become less important when deciding who's winning a contest. Don't you feel the same way, guys? Abs and thighs, and whoever thought Phil Heath was going to give up this pose thought wrong. Here in 2011 his abs looked great. Now, it's true he didn't have the best shape when it comes to the abs, but here they were defined and separated and there wasn't any sign of any kind of distension. Samson has a better six-pack but has a noticeable split between the right and left side. When it comes to the thighs, they match up pretty well. They're both strong in their own way. I wouldn't say the quads are a factor in deciding who's winning this pose. There's one more important aspect here where I believe Samson Dauda has the advantage, and that is the lat department and the overall taper. Phil's narrowness gets the worst of him here. His lats don't flare out enough to compensate for that. I believe this is actually an execution error from Phil because his lats are great. His obliques also spill out to the sides, which has always given Phil an odd look in this pose. All in all, even though it's not a total blowout, Samson Dauda wins this pose against the Gift here. Last pose is the most muscular, and even though Heath is lighter by almost 70 pounds here, he really looks more massive than Samson due to his incredible round muscles everywhere. Heath simply looks cartoonish here. Samson is not that far behind when it comes to this hands clasped variation, but Phil dominates through the shoulders and triceps, plus the muscle separation is pretty obvious. Despite being shorter and narrower, the crab variation seals the deal here. Phil's arms and shoulders remain just as bubbly in this variation, where most athletes lose this aspect to an extent, including Samson Dauda. Indeed, Samson is bigger and wider, but muscle-wise, pound for pound, Phil is more muscular, and he also has better muscle quality. So overall, Phil wins the most muscular pose as well. In conclusion, Heath wins the comparison as probably expected. He did lose 3 poses though, the front lat spread and the abs and thighs, with which I believe most of you could agree. I also gave Samson the side chest pose, where I admit Phil could have won that pose very easily too. That one is debatable. As far as the rest of the poses, maybe aside from the front double biceps, Phil simply dominated all the other poses. Phil gave no chance to Samson from the back, and his roundness and fullness in poses like the side triceps and the most muscular were too much for Samson to handle, at least at this point. Let me know your thoughts on this comparison in the comment section below. Don't forget to hit the like button for the algorithm and subscribe for more videos like this. See you next time.